So I've had the idea for this painting for years, but was too afraid to paint it, especially in watercolor. When I first thought of the idea, not that it's a completely original idea or anything, but I had this vision and I liked it and I wanted to paint it. I originally wanted to paint it digitally, so I added it to my ideas list, which is rather long to be honest. So time went on and I painted some of my other ideas, but I kept skipping over this one for one reason or another. I think it was, in the end, my fear of trying to do something that had that much glowing stuff in it. Now, doing glowing stuff in a digital painting is pretty easy, at least compared to traditional work, but over time I've started doing more of my work in traditional media versus digital. Specifically watercolor for my paintings. I knew that instead of painting it digitally, that I wanted to do this particular piece in watercolor. Watercolor, for those not as familiar with using it, is pretty unforgiving when it comes to light and dark. What I mean is, once you lay down a color to make an area darker, it's incredibly difficult to make it lighter again. You can use a paper to soak up some of the paint, water, mix it on there, try to lift some of the paint, but it's never going to be pure white again. This means that painting with a lot of glowing elements in it would essentially be really, really easy to screw up. So I put it off. I told myself I didn't have the skills, that I wasn't ready, that I would get 80% of the way through it and then I'd mess it up so bad and it would all be ruined. So I didn't do it for years. The only thing that resulted from me not doing it is not finding out that I could do it. After launching my Patreon, I realized it was time to face my fears and stop making excuses for this piece. I told my patrons that I was going to try something that I've been afraid to tackle and that they were going to watch me either succeed or fail at it. But the point was that I was going to try. Either way, I'm going to share the process and they were going to see what happened, and I had to show that not everything will be a perfect and successful endeavor. I took the painting pretty slow, very, very slow, and I built up the color thin layer by thin layer. For the extreme bright whites, I did pull in some white acrylic paint to help with the glowing effect. It's something I'm sure a lot of watercolor purists would scoff at, but honestly, I don't care. It's the result that matters, and white acrylic paint is even whiter than the watercolor paper itself, so I used it. Overall, I'm very happy with the result of this painting. It's not exactly as I pictured it in my head, but what painting ever is. I painted the phoenix a bit darker than intended, and there are a few other details that fought me a little bit along the way, but allowing myself to not expect perfection was pretty liberating. So, is it perfect? No, but is it a success? I think so. I was only worried about whether or not I would ruin it, and as far as I'm concerned, I didn't. But if I had ruined it, then I think I would have pulled it into Photoshop and fixed it, to be honest. But at least it would mean that I could try again, right? I think we allow ourselves to get caught up in the idea that if we try, then we could fail, and that idea of failure is really scary. And maybe I'm not sure why, because everyone fails in one way or another, and yeah, it doesn't feel good, but it doesn't mean that the world stops, right? And the problem with letting this fear get in the way is that if we don't try, then we can never succeed. One of the biggest, challenges of this painting in particular was definitely the phoenix, and for the obvious reasons of that is the biggest and largest glowing element. Now, With every painting that I do, I always try to look at parts that I can improve on, and I also look at elements that I feel like I did really well on. So let's take a look at this real quick and kind of dissect that. The Phoenix I knew I wanted to make shiny. I have a lot of metallic watercolor paints and pigments, and some of the Daniel Smith watercolors I have also have metallic sheens to them. So I knew I wanted to make the Phoenix shiny. That did mean putting down like some sort of darker pigment in order to make that reflection visible. And what it meant was that the Phoenix turned out a little bit darker than I wanted, but by adding the white paint around it, I feel like I still accomplished the glowing effect that I wanted, even though if I were to have done this in Photoshop, I probably would have applied a very large soft brush over the entirety of the Phoenix and probably spent several hours like just flipping through colors and deciding how bright to make it, and probably going over things over and over and over again. So with watercolor, maybe I avoided a bit of that, and I just like, you get one chance, you go for it, and you make the best of it, and which is really nice and something that I think I'm going to keep in the back of my mind is a good thing. It makes me more careful in how I lay down my color. One thing I really liked was the color in the dragon's mouth, which is nice and vivid and bright and like glowing, which I love. Something else that I think turned out really well is the contrast of the back of the dragon and the sky, which is exactly what I was going for, and I'm very happy about that as well. I'm so thankful for the support of my patrons as I worked this out, and I can't wait to tackle other big scary paintings to see what happens next. If you'd like to get a limited edition embellished print of this, and embellished is where I go in and I add metallic watercolor like into the Phoenix with a brush, so it's actual paint being added. I think it makes the prints as close to the original as possible and gives them their own little special look. You can head over to my shop at comiccrew.com/shop, and I will put a link down in the comments for you there, so check it out. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I will see you next time. Bye!